Wow. I am so excited for people to hear our conversation with Piraye Beim, who is the CEO of and founder of Celmatix. It almost sounds like science fiction, coming from the business side. I'm sure it sounds much more down to earth coming from your side, but this whole exciting concept that we talk about a lot, that you can't just look at a woman in one stage of her life. What you want to do is enable her to have the best health and life across the stages that she goes through, not just when she's trying to get pregnant.
The vision that this woman has to better women's health, whether it has to do with, cancer drugs, diseases such as endometriosis and the discomfort and fertility troubles that it can cause, and or staving off menopause for the purpose of bettering health, such as cardiovascular health or cognitive health, is really quite amazing. So I think we have a couple of years to wait based on her timeline, but her vision is really extraordinary.
And I loved what she said. She raised a question that I've never heard before, at least in the guests that we've had on the show, is what is different at the molecular level for person A versus person B, for a person born biologically female versus person born biologically male. And, we're so at the tip of the iceberg with this because we're just now talking about gender as a factor in clinical studies, but she's going deep, deep, deep into the molecular level. So take a listen. I think it's really exciting and just makes me want to learn more.
Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so delighted to have our guest today, Piraye Beim, who is the founder, CEO, as well as a member of the board of directors of Celmatix. She has been innovating in women's health for over 20 years. We're so excited to have you here. You're talking about and creating really interesting changes in women's care delivery. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So we always want to start with, how'd you get here? What was the idea? What was the catalyst? Was there a moment? Obviously, so much of what you're doing now is capitalizing on your academic experience. So tell us about how you got here.
Sure. So great to be on the show. I have been innovating as a PhD scientist in the field of women's health for over 20 years. Like many scientists, I got my start in academia. I did my PhD at Cornell's Medical School, so always was at a translational interface of how do you really use science to impact healthcare? And then did my postdoctoral research at the University of Cambridge in the UK. During my research, I had the privilege of really being on the front lines of women's health oncology as it was going through this powerful precision medicine, personalized medicine transformation. My first year of grad school was the year that they announced the first human genome sequence, but I want to throw a caveat in that they sequenced a man. So the first female was not sequenced for quite a bit, many years to come, but we had at least a male human genome sequence in 2001 when I started grad school. And so I've always thought about biology and thought about bodies through the lens of genes and molecules. And one of the things that has really fascinated me is when we say female, what do we mean biologically and cellularly? Like, what is going on in a cell that has a female genome in it versus a cell that has a male genome in it? And then what are the layers that cascade? So what does that mean for a body that has these female cells in it and has these female specific parts like a uterus and ovaries? And so that question has fascinated me through my entire career and led me to Celmatix. So I did my PhD, I did my postdoc, and then around the time that I turned 30, I went through this big transformation that many women go through where you worry about getting pregnant too early. And then suddenly, like, you flip on a dime and then you're worried about not getting pregnant at all. And it's incredible how, how quickly that switches over. And, a number of friends were getting married and experiencing infertility much earlier than I thought. So that was really the inception for Celmatix was, wait, we're doing this incredible work in oncology to bring precision data really on a molecular level. What makes this breast cancer molecularly different than that breast cancer? And how do we then figure out who might be at risk for it? How do we help counsel them from a young age? And then how do we treat it? And I just thought that playbook was amazing, but I didn't see it going more broadly to women's health outside of oncology. So that's really where it started for me.
And you're asking different questions. It's really interesting. How is this different on a molecular level? We've both been in women's health, Dr. Dweck and I, from different aspects, myself from business and Dr. Dweck from clinical practice. But it's just interesting. The challenge that you're solving and the question that you're asking is quite different than what we generally hear. Alyssa, I'm going to turn
Yeah.
it to you.
Yeah, so I have so many questions. First and foremost, super interesting. Precision medicine really has the ability to individualize care. But my question is this something that's number one, ready for prime time? But more importantly, is this ready for prime time for the masses? Because what I hear in practice is multifold. Number one, the haves can perhaps initiate this type of precision care, but they worry, not necessarily due to access, but due to what is going to be done with the information, and will it be kept private? Will it interfere with them? Ability to get insurance, ability to get a job, ability to, really move on in a private world. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah. And just to be clear, right now we're developing groundbreaking new drugs based on the insights that came out of that 10 years. And I'm happy to talk about that. But let's sidebar for a second to precision medicine more broadly and the risks and opportunities. So the good news is, because the government many years ago, when the promise of genomics had come to light, wanted to ensure that people did not hold themselves back from really leveraging this technology, they did pass laws that you cannot be denied insurance coverage because of your genetic. It's called GINA. There's a law that was passed. The loophole they left in was life insurance. And so one of the just practical bits of advice is, if you are going to undergo genetic testing to see what risk factors you have, for example, for breast and ovarian cancer, it is recommended that you get life insurance first because they can't then take it away from you. But it might create some issues for you to get it. Other than life insurance, you can't really be discriminated against because of your genome. So that's important. Your first question was, is this really game time ready for women today? I would say not at the full potential. So the full potential of, so for example, what we do in oncology for people who can access it. So you brought up access. It's an important point. Depending on where you are in the country, in the US or in the world, your experience of cancer care may look a lot more like the 1960s than 2024. So I think we have to acknowledge the access piece. And but for women who can access it, there's a lot of data now that's brought to bear for helping get them to the cancer care upfront, and also to help them proactively manage their cancer risk early in life. We don't see that same playbook accessible to women for managing, for example, their fertility or their menopause transition. So women can rely on family history a little bit to see if they're at risk for certain things. But other than that, it can feel very depersonalized. Women often still get counseled based on age alone, on what their chances are to get pregnant or to yield, healthy oocytes or offspring. So one thing that I would say is a glimmer of hope, and I have seen the field come a long way, is personal data. So I'm wearing my Aura ring. I'm a big fan of Aura. I also wear a continuous glucose monitor. You can't see it, but it's on my arm here. And one of the things that I often encourage women to do on a consumer level is to track their periods, to be aware of their heart metrics, their sleep function, their glucose. These are data that they can use to start to empower themselves and start to personalize based on doing kind of an experiment of one, right? But But that's not fair because it's yet another thing we're burdening women with. Be the expert of your data, understand what it all means, track the, the trends.
Make sure you don't get gaslit when you go into the doctor's office.
Exactly. So it's not perfect, but for women who really are passionate about this and want to start leveraging personalized medicine today, they can already start, I think, using consumer level products, because that's really what VCs have funded, is consumer products. We're going to get there. I'm an optimist. I'm not going to give up. I'm in like mid-career, God willing. And I'm just getting started. My team's just getting started, but it has been an uphill battle to fundraise for this stuff for sure. We should be a lot farther along than we are now, but it has been really challenging to get the funds.
We want to circle back to that. I would like
Yeah.
for you to share a little bit about, describe, you said you're doing this research to create drugs. Describe what Celmatix actually does and what the products are that you will eventually offer.
Yes. So we spent 10 years collecting an incredible data set. We spent over $80 million on this, which is, guys know, for women's health, that's like a huge
Crazy.
research initiative,
Yeah.
especially to
Huge.
be able to.
Exciting.
Yeah. So I will summarize $80 million of R&D in 10 years for you guys in like 30 seconds, which is that we went into it trying to understand what are the genetic and molecular drivers of female-specific conditions like PCOS, endometriosis, premature menopause, infertility, certain types of infertility. And the headline was ovarian biology. The ovary and the biology of the ovary is really what makes female biology unique. And when you say it, it feels obvious, right? Because it's the female gonad that feminizes the fetus to turn into the female body parts. And so it's not surprising, but I think that certainly as a reproductive biologist coming up, I saw the ovary as a reproductive organ and just a home of the eggs. That's what ovary means. It means home of the eggs. And so we thought about the role of the ovary in fetal development. Everybody acknowledged it has a very important role for kind of setting up the female body. And then the role of the ovary in fertility. But it's like everything in between and everything else that it's doing gets lost. And I think menopause is having its moment right now. And by extension, the ovary is having its moment right now, because people are starting to remember like, oh yeah, this thing does other stuff. But it was just fascinating how, as we started to decode these, endometriosis molecules or these PCOS molecules, they weren't new. They were already out there as molecules that we knew were important for heart function, for immune function, for brain function, for metabolism. And what we were realizing is like, wait, the ovary is central command. It's sitting at the center of all of these different body functions. And it's not just a reproductive organ. So I'll pause there because I saw you guys kind of.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to understand and digest such complex information to see how this translates to care for real people. So, for example, we used to check blood tests called FSH and estradiol to check ovarian function. Limitations: it had to be done during a particular time of the cycle. There were lots of implications in terms of interpretation. If someone was on birth control pills, et cetera, interpretation became a little difficult. And although these were predictive of things, whether it be fertility or perimenopause or menopause, not that useful, really. So now fast forward to AMH, which I understand you're doing a lot of work with, anti-Mullerian hormone, which is a substance produced by the follicles in the ovaries. And we are told clinically, do not use this as your, absolute rock to predict fertility or lack thereof, because it's just a quick window in time. So is the work you're doing going to make this more exact, more predictable? How is this going to translate to patient care?
So I'm glad you brought up AMH, because we are working on an AMH drug program. And so when we think about the ovary and how we want to help the ovary function better throughout the lifespan, and I really mean throughout the lifespan. So I don't mean until midlife. I mean, we need to make the ovary function better in early life. And I believe, and we're working toward a future where ovarian function is aligned with the modern lifespan. So about 100 years ago, on average, most of us would already, like on this call at least, would not be around. Statistically speaking, women, the average life expectancy was early 40s for a woman. And that was up from, the 30s, which is what we evolved for. As we know, menopause and the end of ovarian function happens around 50, which today is called midlife, but that was really, being quite old back in the day. So it turns out that process is quite wasteful. So one of the reasons that we run out of our ovarian function, which is finite, we're born with a finite number of pre-follicles that have the potential to turn into a follicle, which is an egg and the surrounding cells. And it turns out those surrounding cells, which as a reproductive biologist, I always saw as like just the scaffold around the magical egg. It turns out they are the magic. So that's where the magic is happening for the ovary. And all these functions I was talking about are coming from those other cells that are wrapped around the egg. And so right now we have no tools in the armamentarium of physicians to regulate folliculogenesis. We can regulate the menstrual cycle. We can regulate ovulation, which is the last like 28 days of folliculogenesis. But folliculogenesis is a 300-day process that is always going on from the time you go from puberty into menopause. And we have
the
no
folks who are less scientific and clinical on the phone, describe what that is in layman's terms.
Folliculogenesis. So folliculogenesis, so you have like a hair follicle, right? And your hair grows out of it. So those are cells and they grow the hair. And in your ovary, you have cells that grow the egg, but those cells are doing a lot. And you're born with the cells at birth that have the potential to turn into the egg, and then they're wrapped around with those pre-follicle cells. And then they get activated by molecules to turn into a growing follicle. And because we are a monoovulatory, meaning we only ovulate one egg per cycle species. Usually,
not always.
Not always. Those follicles are competing to be the best follicle, and the other follicles get shed during that growth process. So your age of menopause and also your ovarian function throughout your earlier life is dictated by a combination of how many pre-follicles are you born with, and everybody's born with a different number. Genetically, how quickly do you deplete those follicles based on your wiring? And then environmentally, what are the toxins and exposures that are causing you to deplete them more quickly? Because it turns out the ovary is one of the most sensitive organs in your body to environmental harm. So when you smoke, when you expose yourself to, heavy industrial toxins, or even things in body products sometimes can cause this acceleration, you actually end up needing to pull more of those follicles out of storage day over day to try to get to a good egg. And so you deplete your reserve more quickly. So it turns out that the molecular brakes on that process, the process that says we have enough follicles for today, let's put the brakes on, is anti-Mullerian hormone. And anti-Mullerian hormone is one of my favorite hormones, not just because we're working on it, we chose it for a reason, but also because it's a complete misnomer. It's named for its ability to block Mullerian development during fetal development. And the Mullerian system is what gives rise to the female-specific organ. So it basically is like anti-female hormone, is what AMH means. And yet what we learned, we and others, is that not only is AMH a female hormone too, it's not an anti-female hormone, but it's actually one of the most fundamental regulators of ovarian folliculogenesis. And so the challenge is the reason, so as you know, FSH is a drug. It's not just a test, but it's also a drug. Estrogen is a test and a drug. We can debate what's a drug, but we have estrogen drugs. We can add progesterone back. We can add testosterone back. We can't add AMH back or block AMH. We have no drugs to modulate AMH, and therefore we have no drugs to modulate ovarian folliculogenesis. And that's what we're tackling at Celmatix, which is that AMH is a very different molecule than estradiol or FSH. It is huge, and it is basically impossible to make it in a laboratory and turn it into a drug.
Here's today's hot flash. Females are born with between 1 and 2 million eggs, and that number decreases dramatically as a person ages and stops ovulating. In fact, at menopause, the number of eggs that remain are fewer than 1,000. So is the point of studying AMH so deeply and coming up with potentially a drug that mimics this to enhance fertility or to delay or stop menopause? Because I'm not sure what the mission is other than for health and wellness for the population, but there are women who are literally freezing their eggs at young ages in an effort to delay their childbearing, which is very common in my practice. But also thoughts and articles and writings about the delay of menopause to better cardiovascular health, immune health, et cetera. What's the purpose behind what you are studying from a clinical standpoint?
So it's both. So just like estrogen has been used for so many different things, right? It's in birth control. So it's used for contraception. It's used in hormone replacement. We can block estrogen to block certain types of cancers that are depending on estrogen. AMH is going to be one of those incredible, AMH drugs are going to be one of those incredible tools in your toolbox, where there are applications that can boost and help fertility and fertility treatments. There are applications that can help slow down the decline of ovarian aging so that we can align ovarian function and delay menopause. But I actually stopped. So I'm pretty sure I'm one of the first people to ever really say we need to delay menopause. I've been saying this for 6 years. It's having its moment now. And the reason that I really got into that mindset was I realized, wait, why should the ovary ever stop functioning? And that's a whole separate podcast. We can have a whole podcast on that. But I think that I think what has been a challenge is that it's kind of multifold. So one of the bits of pushback that I get from people is, wait, so all of these horrible things I'm going through in perimenopause, you're going to make me go through those at 80 instead of at 40? Is that the idea? We're just going to push it off, and all these horrible periods I've been having and PMS and painful periods and irregular, you're just going to make me keep having those for another couple of decades. Why in the world would I want that, right? Like, I acknowledge menopause has all of these issues, but I don't have PMS anymore. I don't have menstrual cramps anymore. Okay, that's not the goal. The goal is not to take menopause as we experience it today, which is an organ that is not functioning correctly, and we have no tools to manage that process, and just kick the can down the road on that. That is not the goal. The goal is to actually regulate that process so that women have optimally functioning ovaries. They have few and easy periods. They don't have PMS. They don't have menstrual pain. We want to make female biology awesome for everyone. We want to democratize. We all know that woman who never had a period cramp in her life, who had perfectly regular cycles, had no trouble getting pregnant, and had no menopausal symptoms that she was aware of, right? We all know that woman. Why shouldn't every woman have access to that biology? We can't. So that's the dream, is like, let's actually regulate these organs by understanding how they work, and then developing drugs that we know will help us modulate that biology. So everybody has an awesome experience of their ovary, and then doesn't want their ovarian biology to end because they don't want to have hot flashes, sleep issues. And let's turn this to men for a second, because men have gonads too, right? The ovary is our gonad. We have, men have testes. They don't have this cliche of, menopause or andropause, because their testicular function declines linearly. Whereas for us, the way that the ovary ages, it declines more than linearly. We have this accelerated decline in our 30s and 40s that explains perimenopause. We can make that a straight line for us too.
That's we have so much. There's so much here. There's so much to unpack and fascinating science. I want to switch for a minute to the business side. Okay. So ultimately, you have to raise money to enable you to get to the point of development where what you're describing can become a reality. And it was very exciting to read recently that you got a $3.5 million grant from ARPA-H. For those who are listening, that was a subset of First Lady Dr. Biden's announcement that there's going to be an initiative on women's health, and $100 million was earmarked specifically. And it was an unbelievably competitive process. So as you think about that $3.5 million and the other monies that you've raised, what is happening? What are your most important things to happen in the next 2 years, let's say? And just to give people a horizon, going back to Alyssa's initial question, assuming everything goes perfectly, which it never does in anybody's life for anything, but assuming the scientific program goes perfectly, you have access to the funds that you need, when could products foreseeably be on the market?
Yes. So a couple of things to unpack there. So to jump forward, after all of this data research, we have 4 active drug programs at the company. So we have 2 infertility programs. One is leveraging AMH to improve fertility. We haven't really talked about that, so I can't share too much about that, but that's forthcoming.
Okay. We'll get back to you on that. We'll hope to hear more about that in the future.
Yeah. What we have announced is our oral FSH program. So follicle stimulating hormone right now is an injectable drug. This is why we have to inject ourselves with so many kind of injections while we're going through egg freezing and IVF. We have an oral medication that works in animals that we're looking to translate into humans over the next 2 years. And so the idea is that we will be in clinical trials within 2 years, and the clinical trials will take a couple of years after that. So my daughter's 7. I don't think she'll ever have to inject herself to produce oocytes for egg freezing or for IVF. So that's something that I'm working toward. And our team is working toward, and we've made huge breakthroughs in that. So we're really excited about that. The other program is our AMH agonist program. That's the program that recently was supported by the ARPA-H award as well. So we've been working on this and invested close to $20 million in this project already. But one of the challenges is that this next step that we're about to go through for that program is the highest risk step. And that is a step that we have struggled to get VC dollars for. They've said, we'll see you on the other side, basically, of this next step that's very high risk. And so what's so catalytic about this this award from ARPA-H is that it funds that whole step. So we're going to find out.
It's fascinating. We hear this even when we're not talking about deep science, when we're talking about products that just require FDA clearance, not even FDA approval, that we'll see you. I love the way you put it. We'll see you on the other side. Once you've eliminated the risk, then we're interested. And what happens to so many companies in women's health in similar stages in various sectors is, well, this is when we need it. Yes. So I love that ARPA-H is going to change your trajectory, because we speak to many companies, and I work with many companies on a daily basis, who are still in that waiting period without a grant from ARPA-H. But just so people understand, getting that money is an enormous accomplishment. I mean, there were thousands of applications. A couple dozen were chosen. It was done very quickly. So ARPA-H organization had to ingest a lot of information very quickly. And as I understand and read the winners, the majority of them were connected with academic institutions. So yours is unusual also in that it's a company, although obviously the underpinning is academic medicine. And what you started with, which is so important, is what's different now with women's health companies is before manufacturers and companies said, you're a menstruating woman, I'm going to sell you tampons or pads or whatever else the solutions are. If you have severe pain, I'm going to put you on oral contraceptives. And what you're doing, and what so many people in the space are doing, is really talking about the entire range of a woman's sexual and reproductive health, including not wanting to be pregnant. And as you said early on, most people spend more time of their life trying not to get pregnant than to get pregnant. And I obviously know that that's not accurate for people struggling with fertility. But it is so exciting what you're doing. It makes me wish that I'd taken a little more science in college, because it's just so fascinating. But when this comes to fruition and we're cheering you on every step of the way, this can really change the course of how women experience their lives, which is really, really exciting.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for speaking with us and giving us so much hope for the future, at every life stage, if you will.
And we would love to hear as new developments, we're obviously following you in the press, but as new developments become available, we'd love to have you back on and talk about it again. So go forth. We're excited. We're cheering for you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.